Morning. This is really unnerving. One of the things that you will find out, well, I guess you may or may not find out. If you're lucky, you won't find out, is that one of the things that comes with a job like mine is an unlimited number of opportunities to totally embarrass yourself. Where people get you to talk in front of rooms of experts about subjects that you know very little about. So here I am today. And I will tell you a funny thing about the slides you're about to see. So because I was nervous, I kept working on my slides until the very last minute. And I had another presentation, and I realized I had a great set of slides in this package that I wanted to include. And I went to try and put them together. It didn't quite work out. So I had to choose between my really substantive good slides and my really beautiful slides. So look at my beautiful slides. One of the reasons I wanted to show this slide is because the Zuckerberg initiative has gotten started with Mark Priscilla saying that their goal is fairly straightforward: to advance human potential and promote equality. Frankly, unlock human potential and promote equality. I think Mark also said something about people learning 100x what they learned today. So no small aspirations. But this talk I gave, that is this cover slide, I gave in 2013. It was a TEDx talk I did at that time, specifically talking about how we actually begin the work of trying to unlock human potential. What does it actually look like to do that? And when I talk to my sons, if you'll bear with me for a second, I tell them when you are going to try and do something great, there are really a handful of questions that matter. The first question is, what do you believe? Because what you believe frames everything else. Second question is, what are you willing to do? The third is, what do you know how to do? And the fourth is, can you execute? So let me talk about what you believe for a second, because I think there's two dimensions I want to talk about this on. I see Russ Schilling here. He'll know this story well. How many of you have heard me tell the story of DARPA and the IT administrators they needed to train? Okay, sorry. So the Navy had a challenge. They have ships, they have computer systems. They're as complex as computer systems on any large company. They just happen to be out in the middle of the water. So when they break down, if the people there can't fix it, you wind up having to fly consultants out to do it. It's $1 billion+ problem a year. They went to the folks at DARPA and said, we need better computer systems, ones that don't break. The folks at DARPA said, well, who's supposed to fix the computer systems? And they said, well, we have people who are supposed to do that, but there's two problems. One is when people get 5 to 7 years experience, they can make about 3 times as much in the private market as they can make with us, so we lose them. And our new recruits, they're just not up to solving the problems that we have. And the DARPA folks said, well, then let's figure out how to get the new recruits to be as good as the people that you're losing at 5 to 7 years. And so we can do that in about 16 weeks, which is what you usually spend to train them. Now, cut to the end of the story where they actually produce those kind of outcomes, both on knowledge tests, performance tasks, and then with strong records and deployment. But I want to tell one particular story about the process by which they were doing this, where they were developing, you spend a lot of time with a digital tutor, and then you go into labs. And so I had the opportunity to speak to one of the lab instructors. And when they were developing the lab instructors, the labs, they were trying to figure out, obviously, how to keep people in that zone of proximal development, make it really challenging, but not too challenging. And he was looking around the room, and he saw one of the recruits, and she was crying. And he said, I blew it. Like, I blew it on this one. He walks over to her, and he says, what's the matter? She says, I just solved this. And he says, okay, what's the matter? And she says, I was just looking through this log, and they had this same problem on the ship. It took them about 90 days to work through it. He said, yeah, we pulled it because it was challenging like that. She said, well, I just did this in about 30 minutes. I didn't know I was smart. So oftentimes when we talk about education, we think about giving people competencies and skills and all that good stuff. But what if we're giving them new belief systems about what's possible for themselves and in the world? What if we're actually shifting their sense of identity? And how powerful will that be? So that's the first part of the belief. But I also want to talk a little bit about, and this also I talked about in this last presentation, how we think about what's possible. Because we're all trained. And don't worry, I'm not going to argue that there's no bell curves. We're not going to have that argument here today. Okay? But I will say, we're trained to think that the bell curve looks and works a certain way when it comes to education. We think it looks like this, where, basically the average person kind of gets most of what you need to know, and then there's people who really, really get it and people who really, really don't. Matter of fact, we reinforce the system. Oh, there is a clicker. That's awesome. We reinforce the system. Make it work like this with the distribution. What if it's really supposed to look like that? Forgive me if my proportions are off. What if it really is supposed to look like, yeah, there's a curve, but there's almost nobody who can't blow past it. Remember the 2 sigma problem? It's been repeated. You know more about it than I do. I have a simple interpretation of that, which is, if with a one-to-one tutor, as expensive as it is, you can get the 2 sigma effect, then it never is about the kids. It's about how do we get that many people and that much money to do it. Well, we're not really willing to do that. Some might say we couldn't do that. But if that's not the answer, but we know we could actually do something that looks like that, then that's the problem to solve. Does that make sense? Okay. So if that's the problem solved, then you say, okay, so then how do we begin to solve that problem? Now, lots of people have tried to answer something like this question in a lot of different ways. But I think we're in a unique place and time where we can actually make dramatic improvement, radical improvement, very, very quickly in ways that we haven't before. I think that for a number of reasons. But first I want to talk about how we have to think about the problem. Because I think, particularly in education, we have suffered from misdiagnosing part of the problem. Everyone knows that we need interventions, programs, solutions, whatever you want to call them, that are significantly better than what we have today. And in fact, when you look across education, especially when you're in my line of work, you run across programs that do amazing things all the time. And they serve 100 kids. They serve 1,000 kids. And we need to be figuring out solutions that can solve for millions, frankly, billions. So invention is really, really important. When you create something that breaks the boundaries on the status quo, inventions change the possibilities. But I would say today that innovations change lives. When you combine being that much better than the status quo with scale, you change the world. So then how do we get there? I'm going to push you again. We know more today than we've ever known. You here in this room are a testament to that. These are old slides. There's a new version of that. We do a terrible job of integrating it. We do a terrible job of making it accessible to people who actually need to use it. By the way, I'm not blaming you for this. Like, this is an ecosystem problem. I pulled that slide. It's really ugly. But it connects R&D to designers, to entrepreneurs and investors, to procurement systems, to teachers in some cases in K-12 to have to adopt and use it, but lots and lots of folks who have to adopt and use them. And there's all over that chart, it's a fragmented system, there's barriers to actually getting it done. There's lots and lots of things that get in the way that keep the sucking sound that happens in biotech and medicine, in many, many sectors, from happening in the education sector, from happening in the learning sector. But the intersection point is that we can actually change that. There's two ways to change it. One is, remember that chart? This is, I picked up, I don't think you mind me saying, there's a guy, I picked up a couple of great mentors along the way. One of them is this guy named Reed Hastings. And by mentor, I mean like he'll talk to me 3 times a year. And he said, I was thinking in this supply and demand, like how do I have all this evidence of things that work and how do you build demand for those things among the people who need to use them? And he quickly said, well, you remember basic physics, it's like heat transfer. Did anybody else go, like, how's it like heat transfer? He said, think about how much better your solution is than the other as heat. As much better as your solution is than what the status quo is the rate at which everyone else, the heat, will transfer to the rest of the population. So you don't have to build demand, if you will, if you have something that is dramatically better than what is out there, because the people will come to you. Now, what does all this have to do with research? There are sets of questions that we know that if we answer them, they can actually move the field dramatically. You guys are going to hear from John Hattie tomorrow. Am I pronouncing his name correctly? I've only read his stuff. There's lots of it. But what we don't know is all the latent things that could be applied to learning in other domains that are sitting there waiting for us today. What is in the knowledge store in neuroscience and some of the other behavioral sciences and some of the behavioral economics? What are the intersections on these things that we need to understand that could allow us to dramatically advance our understanding of learning, of motivation, of engagement? How do we actually get what we are learning about, how to better identify and describe what people need to know and be able to do in order to be expert? That particular part of the work that we often do with smart people sitting around the table with Post-it notes, how do we get much better at that? And then, consistent with this conference, how do we get better at developing new methodologies to take advantage of the tools that we have today to figure these things out and do it much more quickly than we've ever done it before? These are answerable questions if we can organize ourselves to do it. Now, don't scoff. I know a lot of my education friends and purists, and particularly people who pay attention a lot to evidence, who look at Khan in slight disdain. But let me ask you a question. He's got about 6 to 7 million users a month. That was, again, a few years ago. Imagine if what we already think we know was reflected in the design of content running on the Khan platform. More importantly, imagine if for the last several years, the analytics that sit underneath the Khan platform had been designed to help us do the kind of experiments that let us advance the knowledge about those things we think we know. So I didn't have words for this until a couple of weeks ago when I was sitting in a meeting with someone, and then they said, I was like, I got to scale what works. That part I was good on. And they said, we have to find ways to work the things that are at scale. These platforms that people use because they're accessible and they're easy, they are a gateway to insight. And we need to figure out how we actually tap into them and organize ourselves to take advantage of it. There's someone here. Are you speaking? Not this time? So Zoran Popovich, you guys know Zoran, of course. Become masterful at figuring out how to tap into these things that are going to go to scale to accelerate learning. Am I talking too long? I think I got late. Is it? Okay, sorry. Can you hear me in the back, though? You cannot hear me in the back. You should have waved your hands or something. I can talk louder. I'm trying for the dramatic effect up here. All right. You get the idea on the con stuff. Like, there are places where people congregate already. I work in education. I came through business. I understand incentives really, really well. One of the problems with the landscape that we have is that as much as we would like, there is very little incentive to spend time and resources proving things work. Mission-based people, completely mission-based people, they do it. Everyone else, the rational economic decision, because of the way our market works in education, is to spend more money on sales, less money on evaluation and research. Don't like it, but it is what it is. I spent my entire time, literally almost, when I was with the federal government, trying to create the context where there's actually a market for evidence, where having evidence gets you in the funding flow, where having more evidence gets you access to more resources than having a little bit of evidence. We don't have a system that rationalizes producing evidence of the things that we put in front of our children. So, we need to look at the entire ecosystem, all of the players, the ones like Khan who want to do more and better work and have scale, the ones who have scale and are not feeling any pressure to do better, the government officials who don't understand why kids can't just learn the way they did, and the general public who has no idea that a shift like that in the curve is possible. You like it? So here's the deal. We need new ways of working, right? I talked about failures of knowledge, things we need to know, and the fact that knowledge doesn't get to the folks who need it. Failures of design. I used to, on a pretty regular basis, unfortunately for my kids, like try and put educational product in front of them to get them to test it out for me. I'd mix it in with other stuff. Yeah. Cut it on. Yeah. This is one of these education things, isn't it? The production value, the user interface, the quality of interaction, how fun and easy it is to get started. Like, these are kids that will scream and yell at a game because it is so hard, and yet stay there trying and trying and trying over and over again. And yet, look at this stuff and go, That's what we get in education. So how do we get the designers, the people who are expert on these user interfaces and experiences and building engagement, to take what we know from science and design things that people really, really want to use? How do we get solutions for teachers so that they have strategies and tools that they can use to try and produce these kind of outcomes that are much easier for them to access? I mean, think about it. We ask teachers to do extraordinary things. Stand in a room full of people about this big nowadays, and somehow know exactly what each one of you knows and is able to do and is interested in, and match it to the perfect instructional approach and content. And for that, we give them colored markers and some PD at the beginning of the year. So there is the opportunity to think very differently about how we provide people with the resources to do what we're asking them to do, which is transform lives. Can you hear me in the back any better now? Oh, God, okay. All right. So, in conclusion, the idea here is this. We need a new infrastructure. We need new ways of working that tie together our researchers and designers and engineers and entrepreneurs and the educators with testbed sites that are highly instrumented, with data that can be shared privately but broadly for a large research community to jump in, share insights and information really very, very, very quickly, and speed up the research and innovation cycle. Like, that is clear that we need. We also need for there to be some justice. And here's what I mean by that. Who here knows how much money we spend on defense research every year? Defense research. Russ, do you know?
A large number.
It is somewhere in the 70 to 80-ish billion, depending on the year. Do you know how much we spend in education? At the federal, this is just federal, by the way. Okay, in education, if you just take IES, we just cracked $1 billion. One. Most of that is not actually, as you know, is not actually research. That's a different story. Second, if you throw in a little bit of NSF, and even if I scrape in a little bit of what NICHD does, I can get all the way to 2.8. Think about that. Like, what, other than whether you are alive or dead, which I'll give you on the medical side, what has a bigger impact on your life's potential and, frankly, our way of life as a country than this? So why aren't we spending on it? And why don't people understand that investment? So we've got to get good at explaining why this is important. And I will tell you, some of your friends are the problem. Here's what I mean by that. I will not name the college president, university president, who heard about a paper I wrote on R&D and how to build a new infrastructure, asked for it. I sent it to them. The person, about a month and a half later, sent me back a text that said, I read your paper. This is the university president. I read it, and I realized we could do all of this, and poor children would be no better off in their schools. And I texted back very quickly. I said, well, if you did this in isolation, yes, but who is talking about that? Why do we not act like R&D in the medical field is somehow stealing money from clinics and doctors? But when you talk about investing in R&D in this space, somehow you are stealing the money that the most in need for direct services. Why do we not see this as investing in better solutions, better outcomes, more equity? For some reason, both liberal and progressive and conservative don't see this as a worthwhile investment. How do we change that story? So I'm done. This is that part of the conversation where I say to you, you already know the kind of substantive questions we need to wrestle to ground to make this kind of progress. You know the work that you do every day, and you know whether the work that you don't do to try and connect it to anybody who's going to use it. You know your colleagues who work on topics that are so esoteric, you wonder who sits in their classes. And then you realize maybe they don't want anybody to. Sorry to be cruel. If this enterprise is about changing people's lives, about changing the world through them, we need something different. We need a new infrastructure, we need a new way of working, we need a new discipline, and we need to get the people who are in the business of putting things in the hands of our teachers and our students to care about what you do every day. I can't do it. I'm gonna try though. A little bit of money helps. But I need people who actually know what they're talking about to organize the kind of work that has a clear social payoff and where somebody goes, if I could do that, I could build a giant company. I know, this is scary talk. People who want to build giant companies move things to make it happen. Why is there a large R&D investment from the federal government in defense? Because there is a defense industry. Why is there a large investment in biotech? Because there are pharmaceutical companies. This is an uncomfortable truth in the world, that good things often still require market incentives to get what they need to get done. Unusual partnerships, think about them, find them, make them work, make them better. People are genuinely good intentioned, but they often are not going to take the time to track you down to figure out how to do it. I don't have a pithy closing, so I'll just say thank you. So I got I think a minute or two for questions, more than that. In the back. Do we have a mic runner? I don't need a mic. Can you get her a mic?
And people have to believe. Poor children.
Yep. So I have this. Oh, snap. That's really different, isn't it? Okay. Next question in the comment. I actually don't mind. I like it when people disagree with me because it lets me be more clear about the things. Oh, I like it when people disagree with me because it lets me be more clear if I've not been clear, or to get a different position in the air. So if you want to fight, let's go. It's all good.
It's the speakers. The microphone is still cracked.
Is that right? Okay. I'll just shout. All right, question over here.
Yeah. Oh, sure. It was a little hard for us to hear the end, so if I'm totally off base, just wave me away. But,
Go.
You talked about we need an education industry in order to pull the money towards it. I feel like there is an education industry kind of vested in the status quo. So we've got big companies, ETS or whoever you want to point to, making money off keeping things the way they are rather than changing them. So what we do with that?
So, I alluded to this, and now I'll be really explicit about it. So one of the things that's interesting, you guys know my background, I came through business first, right? Every sector has an innovation pipeline, right? And in most cases where there's a market, it's relentless, right? People invent all kinds of things. There are people whose job it is to go and find those things. That's what VCs do, venture capitalists do most of the time. They fund a bunch of them. And many times the market will ratchet them out pretty quickly about what works and what doesn't. And that determines what things actually get to go to scale and what companies. And the product feature set is what, combined with the price, is what allows you to decide which things are going to move. In our sector, what ought to be the most important feature is the outcome for the learner, or the capacity that it builds in the teacher. It ought to be very clear that the solution, whether it is a strategy, a product, a practice, whatever it is, that it produces the outcome that we're looking for. Now, in an ideal world, you would design a system where you just paid for the outcomes that you want. like if you got the outcome, great. Like that's the most efficient way. But since you can't do that, the next best thing is to pay for the probability of the outcome. And that is frankly all evidence is. So when I was in government, what we were trying to do, specifically what I was trying to do, is to create incentive structures around evidence so that people who actually have evidence are the ones who are prioritizing the funding flows. Now, that is not how our education system works today. Our formula dollars flow out with no priority for the most part around evidence. Most of our competitive programs until recently did not include any evidence requirements. Evidence-based, which basically means nothing, right? And so now having very clear definitions about what levels of, just shut them down, just shut them down. More evidence provisions. We have to be in the business of helping those folks who control resources look for evidence and know how to evaluate it. We need to come up with a 5-star system, something that simple, that procurement officers can use to decide what does this look like in terms of the level of evidence, what does it look like in terms of the level of impact I should be expecting, and then what do people who have tried it before have to say about in what context you can implement it well. And there are people trying to work on this, but it's not happening fast enough. The other thing we have to do is we need people who are willing to get in the business and say, I will compete on performance. I will take some of my payment only on the basis of how well your students do. Yeah, that's a scary one, right? It's scary. We don't know how to do it yet. But that's where this has to go. Because otherwise, the incentives, I could spend a little bit more on the evaluation of this, a little more on product quality, but if I get one more salesperson, I'm going to get way more from that. It's kind of ugly, right? It is what it is, as they say.
So, I guess I'll stand up. You mentioned getting the best designers and innovators into the system to design products that aren't chocolate covered broccoli, but the incentives aren't there for those people. So you just mentioned we want to pay people on performance. I run a company that would sign up for that all day, but you can't sell things to schools effectively.
Correct.
Right? At scale.
Yeah, so you remember that I talked about this being an ecosystem? Sure. What he said is, it sucks to be an education entrepreneur. Those aren't your words. But here's what he said. What he said is, because of what I said about like the incentive structures for the big companies, the hardest thing about being an education entrepreneur is you have no guarantee that if you produce a better product, in terms of producing a better outcome, that you're going to win, right? Like, you should be able to win. If I can produce better learning outcomes, I should be able to win. I should be able to know that my organization, for profit or nonprofit, is going to scale. Because I'm better than everybody else. But that's just not how it works. And because of that, what he said is, and you want to try and attract the top designers and you want to attract the top engineers to work on these things so you can make them not chocolate-covered broccoli. That was his word. It is hard to do when the economics of education and entrepreneurship are so hard. So unfortunately, we have this vicious cycle going, right? And we've got to find ways to try and crack that code. Now, I think that there are a number of ways to go after it, especially now. But I'm making this stuff up, I have to say. Like, trying to tackle an industry like this and trying to figure out how you create an enabling platform that lets folks like you that have product that produces, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt on this, by the way, that produces better outcomes. Stand up, who are you and where are you from? Because you just set me up for that.
Okay. Grant Hosmer, CEO of a company called CodeSpark. We make a game that teaches young kids about computer science called The Foos.
Okay, and how do you know it works?
Through research. We've done early trials that are small, and now we're doing bigger trials.
Okay, this group, that's not going to cut it, by the way.
Yeah, well, we're 20 months old, so we're
Okay, good deal.
But we've had 4 million kids play our game in the last 20 months in 201 countries. And when we do our research, we see that kids improve in their sequencing abilities 20% on average after 3 30-minute sessions.
Okay. I have no idea what that means.
Well, sequencing...
No. Don't explain it. Don't explain it. Don't explain it. It's all good. We're good. We're good. So, but what I don't want you to take from this conversation is, my God, this is so complicated we can't do anything about it. Alan Kay is coming tomorrow, right? And I had the opportunity to sit with Alan, and he said something that has literally stayed with me ever since. I probably say it twice a week right now. I have no idea if it'll have the same impact on you. Probably not from me. But what he said was, just remember that 40 years ago, 40 years from now, is today. Think about it. So these complex systems that seem so hard to change, that seem unfathomable, trust me, did you think the world was going to look like it does today 40 years ago? Did you imagine carrying around what you carry in your pocket today? Just suspend disbelief and starting to figure out how to believe in a very, very different future. I'm going to call the lady behind you first, Russ, and then I'll call you. Go.
Hi, so I'm also an education entrepreneur, and one of the things when you go out to raise traditional venture capital, you find out really quickly is that most VC funds are designed for 8 to 10 year return cycles, and that's largely based on their structure and healthy capital. When you actually think about the context of the education system, achieving meaningful systemic change in 10 years is ridiculous. You're looking more at 15 to 20 years. How do you see your team and your fund playing into developing more funding vehicles that have a longer range?
So thank you very much. So one of the reasons that I was so excited about the role that I have now is that Mark and Priscilla are very comfortable using all the tools at their disposal. And all the tools at their disposal means I can make grants, I can make investments, and we can make investments with very little return expectation or a super long-term return expectation, or something that looks more traditional if we think it sends a really important, powerful signal to the field. This thing about getting other people to want to invest on the right things, making it so that you want to get paid, you need to invest in companies that work, have things that actually work for kids. That's how you get these VC guys to have the right orientation and make sure the right companies get funded instead of the wrong ones. So we will continue to invest in the field, and I think you'll see more and more folks using their tools very effectively who care about education. We'll get attacked. I mean, to be blunt, like they're going to be, I'm waiting for the articles about the billionaires profiteering off of education. It's just coming. It's all good. But the truth of the matter is that when you find a model that can scale on its own, when you place an investment in it, and then it achieves the scale to be invest in their own R&D, that is incredible good. When I create the companies that will have people coming to knock on your door to say, what have you got for us to make us a little bit better? That's how we begin to change this ecosystem. So I think we're going to attract more capital to the market. I think we'll be able to better signal people who want to invest based on things that actually work. I think that because we can manage we have, all the returns go back into more good stuff. So we can take as long as we need, take as little as we need, whatever the case might be. And at the same time, what I'm trying to figure out, as I tell you my problems as I'm trying to work through my strategy, is how to not signal that this is a market where nobody cares about returns, because that has the opposite effect. Got to work through all of that. And at the same time, very, very happy that while we're waiting for the market to catch up, I can do with my nonprofit dollars everything I need to do to create opportunity at closer to the bottom of the pyramid. Russ?
So Jim, you and I have discussed this before. So
Sure.
I think the other problem that I get curious about today is that the federal investment, and to a large part what we see in the foundations today, are funding innovative projects. And what the DARPA model does, that we've discussed, is fund moonshot programs. And so I think part of the reason we don't see a lot of things transitioning into the marketplace that we're doing on this level
So I couldn't agree with you more, Russ, and you should have said a disclosure thing, which is that you're still at the department, and we talked about ARPA Ed, and Russ has been carrying this thing on his own since I left, largely, without a whole lot of air cover. I did. So just really quickly, so in that R&D paper I was talking about, I said we need 3 things that we actually don't have in the sector right now. One, we kind of have, which is a lot of the work that we're doing, this basic research, the kind of things that are relatively, they either are very early stage or they're smaller projects, the kind of things you see getting funded from NSF and a lot of foundations right now. It needs to be a much more clear and coherent agenda and a much better way of organizing the work so we can build on each other's insights more quickly. But that would continue. The other thing, though, that we need is like field scans. In our sector, because of the data issues, as all of you probably suffer through, our ability to sense positive anomalies and analyze them quickly and vet them and figure out whether you can actually scale them, it's very nascent. Some would say non-existent. And so how do we actually create an infrastructure that allows us to sense those positive anomalies and then figure out very quickly which ones deserve to be elevated and for whom? So there's that piece of it as well. But then you get to the part that Russ is talking about, right? The DARPA phenomenon, where Russ, well, he came from DARPA, by the way, but what they do is they say, here is a problem that needs to be solved. We know what the current state of science and technology is. We think we know what is coming and have a perspective about it. And we want to see if we can accelerate the horizon, say 20 years, and put a solution on the ground today. We need that. We need that kind of approach. We need those kind of program managers. We need folks who can work in the way that they did on that IT project I talked about, where we put to work 10, 15, $20 million around a big problem that we think we can solve. But when we do, we don't make a 0.3 standard deviations improvement. Something giant happens. Something giant happens. So, yes, we still need an ARPA for education. I'll come back to you if no one else raises their hand.
Thanks. Not to cut something of a crank on this, but everybody in the back can hear me anyways, right? Right. Sorry, this is just for people in the back. A problem is thinking about education as an expense. That happens in the Department of Defense, which I'm somewhat familiar.
Yes.
The notion is that, if you are managing a unit in the field, you kind of carry about their effectiveness. And so you like to see some data, and so you become a little more interested in education or training as an investment rather than an expense. But for the residential training of individuals, it's typically looked on as an expense. Get the pipeline through at minimum cost. You minimize the cost, you get them through, you get a promotion. But what we need to do more of, and I've gone up again and again and say, look, here's a great advance. Like the DARPA programs, Ralph Channel's program, education documents and so forth. Great stuff. But the problem is they say, okay, how much does it cost? And many times researchers cannot say how much it costs. But worse, even when you say how much it costs, they'll come back and say, too much. Have to talk the next step. The cost is only half the step. You've got to look at the return on investment.
Yep.
And that's, so we need to get, acquainted with stuff like net present value, internal rate of return, and the math is really difficult. It goes all the way up to 6th grade. We're not talking about things that are really difficult to do. If we would just talk, I think, more about the return on investment in training and education as an investment, I think we do a little bit better. Because they don't care about the data about how much
So
they want to know what they get back from their money.
I couldn't agree with you more. But this is where we all need to be thinking together, right? So, one, I will tell you, I'm going to tell you again, the more language I use, I'm scared to death right now because I haven't gone out and talked to a lot of people anything about Chan Zuckerberg, and so a lot of market language is associated with what we're doing as the first thing that comes out. Not helpful. Talking in terms of return on investment. You are not going to be understood by the people who you need to make the procurement decision in the Department of Defense, and you're not going to be appreciated by the people in education for using that kind of language about what they do. So we have to get comfortable with the fact that incentives matter, that return matters, and that if we want people to think about education as the investment as it is, we have to get them comfortable with the idea of talking about it that way. Doesn't mean we still don't have free public education anymore. Just means even in free public education, someone is paying. Someone is paying. And if you are a liberal, then you want every dollar that is spent to produce the best possible outcome, especially for those most in need, and for those resources to be able to go as far as they possibly can to serve the most possible people. And if you are a conservative, then you want every tax dollar that's spent to be spent as efficiently and effectively as possible. Efficacy matters on both of those agendas. Now, I pulled this back up because this belief system thing is really, really important. Because you can't tell me that if somebody believed, I wish you could see what I was doing with my fingers, if somebody believed that there was that much left potential, and you could move people over that far, you can't tell me a rational person wouldn't think that that had a huge payoff. Think about it. But because mostly they don't, it's very easy to say, probably not worth it. So I wish it was not so complicated, that we didn't have to deal with people's belief systems, that the procurement rules weren't what they are, that the policies favored evidence already. I wish it was a lot simpler. It's just not. So we're going to have to deal with it as it is. What was the Einstein quote? You guys probably know better than I do. Everything should be as simple as it can be, but no simpler. We got to figure out how to move it forward. We have to change the conversation and get parties on all sides comfortable with the conversation that we actually need to have. And we got to give people things to believe in. And I learned a number of different things when I was in government. First thing I learned is not to care what people actually say about me. The second thing I learned, though, is most our representatives on the Hill, they're people. And like most people, like the data and evidence is something they like to hold while they tell the story about the thing that moved them. It's the stories that matter. We care. The staff member who's kind of crunching the numbers for them, they may even care. When they go out to talk to their constituents, they are not going to hold out your report. They're going to tell a story like the one I told when I started, about somebody whose job was saved, or a little girl who was able to learn to read, who no one thought was going to be able to read, or kids who live in poverty who outscored the kids in the suburbs. Whatever those outcomes are that translate into changing real people's lives, those stories are what are going to move people to begin to believe that something different is possible. Now, that may not be your thing, but you need to find somebody whose thing it is and get them to help you.